A note about Fulmer. He no longer describes the Earth as a library globe or a map that has come alive, as a cosmic eye staring into deep space. This last was his most ambitious fling at imagery. The war has changed the way he sees the Earth. The Earth is land and water, the dwelling place of mortal men, in elevated dictionary terms. He doesn't see it anymore, storm-spiraled, sea-bright, breathing heat and haze and color, as an occasion for picturesque language, for easeful play or speculation. At 220 kilometers we see ship wakes and the larger airports, icebergs, lightning bolts, sand dunes. I point out lava flows and cold core eddies. That silver ribbon off the Irish coast, I tell him, is an oil slick. This is my third orbital mission, Fulmer's first. He is an engineering genius, a communications and weapons genius, and maybe other kinds of genius as well. As mission specialist, I'm content to be in charge. The word specialist in the standard usage of Colorado Command refers here to someone who does not specialize. Our spacecraft is designed primarily to gather intelligence. The refinement of the quantum burn technique enables us to make frequent adjustments of orbit without firing rockets every time. We swing out into high, wide trajectories, the whole Earth as our psychic light, to inspect unmanned and possibly hostile satellites. We orbit tightly, snugly, take intimate looks at surface activities in untraveled places. The banning of nuclear weapons has made the world safe for war. I try not to think big thoughts or submit to rambling abstractions, but the urge sometimes comes over me. Earth orbit puts men into philosophical temper. How can we help it? We see the planet complete. We have a privileged vista. In our attempts to be equal to the experience, we tend to meditate importantly on subjects like the human condition. It makes a man feel universal, floating over the continents, seeing the rim of the world, a line as clear as a compass arc, knowing it is just a turning of the bend to Atlantic twilight, to sediment plumes and kelp beds, an island chain glowing in the dusky sea. I tell myself it is only scenery. I want to think of our life here as ordinary, as a housekeeping arrangement, an unlikely but workable setup caused by a housing shortage or spring floods in the valley. Fulmer does the system's checklist and goes to his hammock to rest. He is 23 years old, a boy with a longish head and close-cropped hair. He talks about northern Minnesota as he removes the objects in his personal preference kit, placing them on an adjacent Velcro surface for tender inspection. I have a 1901 silver dollar in my personal preference kit, little else of note. Fulmer has graduation pictures, bottle caps, small stones from his backyard. I don't know whether he chose these items himself or whether they were pressed on him by parents who feared that his life in space would be lacking in human moments. Our hammocks are human moments, I suppose, although I don't know whether Colorado Command planned it that way. We eat hot dogs and almond crunch bars and apply lip balm as part of the pre-sleep checklist. We wear slippers at the firing panel. Fulmer's football jersey is a human moment. Outsize, purple and white, of polyester mesh, bearing the number 79, a big man's number, a prime of no particular distinction. It makes him look stoop-shouldered, abnormally long-framed. I still get depressed on Sundays, he says. Do we have Sundays here? No, but they have them there and I still feel them. I always know when it's Sunday. Why do you get depressed? The slowness of Sundays, something about the glare, the smell of warm grass, the church service, the relatives visiting in nice clothes. The whole day kind of lasts forever. I didn't like Sundays either. They were slow but not lazy slow. They were long and hot, or long and cold. In summer my grandmother made lemonade. There was a routine. The whole day was kind of set up beforehand, and the routine almost never changed. Orbital routine is different. It's satisfying. It gives our time a shape and substance. Those Sundays were shapeless, despite the fact that you knew what was coming, who was coming, what we'd all say. You knew the first words out of the mouth of each person before anyone spoke. I was the only kid in the group. People were happy to see me. I used to want to hide. What's wrong with lemonade? I ask. A battle management satellite, unmanned, reports high-energy laser activity in orbital sector Dolores. We take out our laser kits and study them for half an hour. The beaming procedure is complex, and because the panel operates on joint control only, we must rehearse the sets of established measures with the utmost care. A note about the Earth. The Earth is the preserve of day and night. It contains a sane and balanced variation, a natural waking and sleeping, or so it seems to someone deprived of this tidal effect. This is why Fulmer's remark about Sundays in Minnesota struck me as interesting. He still feels, or claims he feels, or thinks he feels, that inherently earthbound rhythm. To men at this remove, it is as though things exist in their particular physical form in order to reveal the hidden simplicity of some powerful mathematical truth. The earth reveals to us the simple, awesome beauty of day and night. It is there to contain and incorporate these conceptual events. Fulmer in his shorts and suction clogs resembles a high school swimmer, all but hairless, an unfinished man not aware he is open to cruel scrutiny, not aware he is without devices, standing with arms folded in a place of echoing voices and chlorine fumes. There is something stupid in the sound of his voice. It is too direct, a deep voice from high in the mouth, slightly insistent, a little loud. Fulmer has never said a stupid thing in my presence. It is just his voice that is stupid, a grave and naked bass, a voice without inflection or breath. We are not cramped here. The flight deck and crew quarters are thoughtfully designed. Food is fair to good. There are books, video cassettes, news and music. We do the manual checklists, the oral checklists, the simulated firings with no sign of boredom or carelessness. If anything, we are getting better at our tasks all the time. The only danger is conversation. I try to keep our conversations on an everyday plane. I make it a point to talk about small things, routine things. This makes sense to me. It seems a sound tactic, under the circumstances, to restrict our talk to familiar topics, minor matters. I want to build a structure of the commonplace, but Fulmer has a tendency to bring up enormous subjects. He wants to talk about war and the weapons of war. He wants to discuss global strategies, global aggressions. I tell him now that he has stopped describing the Earth as a cosmic eye. He wants to see it as a game board or computer model. He looks at me plain-faced and tries to get me in a theoretical argument. Selective space-based attacks versus long, drawn-out, well-modulated land-sea-air engagements. He quotes experts, mentions sources. What am I supposed to say? He will suggest that people are disappointed in the war. The war is dragging into its third week. There is a sense in which it is worn out, played out. He gathers this from the news broadcasts we periodically receive. Something in the announcer's voice hints at a letdown, a fatigue, a faint bitterness about something. Fulmer is probably right about this. I've heard myself in the tone of the broadcaster's voice, in the voice of Colorado Command, despite the fact that our news is censored, that they are not telling us things they feel we shouldn't know, in our special situation, our exposed and sensitive position. In his direct and stupid-sounding and uncannily perceptive way, young Fulmer says that people are not enjoying this war to the same extent that people have always enjoyed and nourished themselves on war, as a heightening, a periodic intensity. What I object to in Fulmer is that he often shares my deep-reaching and most reluctantly held convictions. Coming from that mild face, and that earnest, resonant run-on voice, these ideas unnerve and worry me, as they never do when they remain unspoken. I want words to be secretive, to cling to a darkness in the deepest interior. Fulmer's candor exposes something painful. It is not too early in the war to discern nostalgic references to earlier wars. All wars refer back. Ships, planes, entire operations are named after ancient battles, simpler weapons, what we perceive as conflicts of nobler intent. This recon interceptor is called Tomahawk 2. When I sit at the firing panel, I look at the photograph of Fulmer's granddad when he was a young man in sagging khakis and a shallow helmet, standing in a bare field, a rifle strapped to his shoulder. This is a human moment, and it reminds me that war, among other things, is a form of longing. We dock with the command station, take on food, exchange cassettes. The war is going well, they tell us, although it isn't likely they know much more than we do. Then we separate. The maneuver is flawless, and I'm feeling happy and satisfied, having resumed human contact with the nearest form of the outside world, having traded quips and manly insults, traded voices, traded news and rumors, buzzes, rumbles, scuttlebutt. We stow our supplies of broccoli and apple cider and fruit cocktail and butterscotch pudding. I feel a homey emotion, putting away the colorfully packaged goods, a sensation of prosperous well-being, the consumer's solid comfort. Fulmer's t-shirt bears the word inscription. People had hoped to be caught up in something bigger than themselves, he says. They thought it would be a shared crisis. They would feel a sense of shared purpose, a shared destiny, like a snowstorm that blankets a large city. But lasting months, lasting years, carrying everyone along, creating fellow feeling where there was only suspicion and fear. Strangers talking to each other, meals by candlelight when the power fails. The war would ennoble everything we say and do. What was impersonal would become personal. What was solitary would be shared. But what happens when the sense of shared crisis begins to dwindle much sooner than anyone expected? We begin to think the feeling lasts longer in snowstorms. A note about selective noise. 48 hours ago, I was monitoring data on the mission console when a voice broke in on my report to Colorado Command. The voice was unenhanced, heavy with static. I checked my headset, checked the switches and lights. Seconds later, the command signal resumed, and I heard our flight dynamics officer ask me to switch to the redundant sense frequencer. I did this, but it only caused the weak voice to return, a voice that carried with it a strange and unspecifiable poignancy. I don't mean I knew who was speaking. It was the tone I recognized, the touching quality of some half-remembered and tender event, even through the static, the sonic mist. In any case, Colorado Command resumed transmission in a matter of seconds. We have a deviate, Tom Hawk. We copy. There's a voice. We have gross oscillation here. There's some interference. I've gone redundant, but I'm not sure it's helping. We are clearing an outframe to locate source. Thank you, Colorado. It is probably just selective noise. You're negative red on the step function quad. It was a voice, I told them. We have just received an affirm on selective noise. I could hear words in English. We copy selective noise. Someone was talking, Colorado. What do you think selective noise is? I don't know what it is. You are getting a spill from one of the unmans. If it's an unmanned, how could it be sending a voice? It is not a voice as such, Tom Hawk. It is selective noise. We have some real firm telemetry on that. It sounded like a voice. It is supposed to sound like a voice, but it is not a voice as such. It is enhanced. It sounded unenhanced. It sounded human in all sorts of ways. It is signals and they are spilling from the geosynchronous orbit. This is your deviate. You are getting voice codes from 22,000 miles. It is basically a weather report. We will correct, Tomahawk. In the meantime, advise you stay redundant. About 10 hours later, Fulmer heard the voice. Then he heard 2 or 3 other voices. They were people speaking, people in conversation. He gestured to me as he listened, pointed to the headset, then raised his shoulders, held his hands apart to indicate surprise and bafflement. In the swarming noise, as he said later, it wasn't easy to get the drift of what people were saying. The static was frequent, the references were somewhat elusive, but Fulmer mentioned how intensely affecting these voices were, even when the signals were at their weakest. One thing he did know, it wasn't selective noise, a quality of purest, sweetest sadness issued from remote space. He wasn't sure, but he thought there was also a background noise integral to the conversation. Laughter, the sound of people laughing. In other transmissions, we've been able to recognize theme music, an announcer's introduction, wisecracks and bursts of applause, commercials for products whose long-lost brand names evoke the golden antiquity of great cities buried in sand and river silt. Somehow, we are picking up signals from radio programs of 40, 50, 60 years ago. Our current task is to collect imagery data on troop deployment. Fulmer surrounds his Hasselblad, engrossed in some micro-adjustment. There is a seaward bulge of stratocumulus, sun glint and littoral drift. I see blooms of plankton in a blue of such Persian richness it seems an animal rapture, a color change to express some form of intuitive delight. As the surface features unfurl, I list them aloud by name. It is the only game I play in space, reciting the Earth names, the nomenclature of contour and structure, glacial scour, moraine debris. Shatter coning at the edge of a multi-ring impact site, a resurgent caldera, a mass of castellated rimrock. Over the sand seas now, parabolic dunes, star dunes, straight dunes with radial crests. The emptier the land, the more luminous and precise the names for its features. Fulmer says the thing science does best is name the features of the world. He has degrees in science and technology. He was a scholarship winner, an honors student, a research assistant. He ran science projects, read technical papers in the deep-pitched, earnest voice that rolls off the roof of his mouth. As mission specialist, generalist, I sometimes resent his non-scientific perceptions, the glimmerings of maturity and balanced judgment. I am beginning to feel slightly preempted. I want him to stick to systems, onboard guidance, data parameters. His human insights make me nervous. I'm happy, he says. These words are delivered with matter-of-fact finality, and the simple statement affects me powerfully. It frightens me, in fact. What does he mean he's happy? Isn't happiness totally outside our frame of reference? How can he think it is possible to be happy here? I want to say to him, this is just a housekeeping arrangement, a series of more or less routine tasks. Attend to your tasks, do your testing, run through your checklists. I want to say, forget the measure of our vision, the sweep of things, the war itself, the terrible death. Forget the overarching night, the stars as static points, as mathematical fields. Forget the cosmic solitude, the welling awe and dread. I want to say, happiness is not a fact of this experience, at least not to the extent that one is bold enough to speak of it. Laser technology contains a core of foreboding and myth. It is a clean sort of lethal package we are dealing with, a well-behaved beam of photons, an engineered coherence, but we approach the weapon with our minds full of ancient warnings and fears. There ought to be a term for this ironic condition, primitive fear of the weapons we are advanced enough to design and produce. Maybe this is why the project managers were ordered to work out a firing procedure that depends on the coordinated actions of two men, two temperaments, two souls, operating the controls together. Fear of the power of light, the pure stuff of the universe. A single dark mind in a moment of inspiration might think it liberating to fling a concentrated beam at some lumbering, hump-backed Boeing making its commercial rounds at 30,000 feet. Fulmer and I approach the firing panel. The panel is designed in such a way that the joint operators must sit back to back. The reason for this, although Colorado Command never specifically said so, is to keep us from seeing each other's face. Colorado wants us to be sure that weapon personnel in particular are not influenced by each other's tics and perturbations. We are back to back, therefore, harnessed in our seats, ready to begin. Fulmer in his purple and white jersey, his fleeced padabouts. This is only a test. I start the playback. At the sound of a pre-recorded voice command, we each insert a modal key in its proper slot. Together we count down from 5 and then turn the keys 1/4 left. This puts the system in what is called an open-minded mode. We count down from 3. The enhanced voice says, "You are open-minded now." Fulmer speaks into his voice print analyzer. "This is code B for bluegrass. Request voice identity clearance." We count down from 5 and then speak into our voice print analyzers. We say whatever comes into our heads. The point is simply to produce a voice print that matches the print in the memory bank. This ensures that the men at the panel are the same men authorized to be there when the system is in an open-minded mode. This is what comes into my head. I am standing at the corner of 4th and Main, where thousands are dead of unknown causes, their scorched bodies piled in the street. We count down from 3. The enhanced voice says, "You're cleared to proceed to lock in position." We turn our modal keys half right. I activate the logic chip and study the numbers on my screen. Fulmer disengages voice print and puts us in voice circuit rapport with the onboard computer's sensing mesh. We count down from 5. The enhanced voice says, "You're locked in now." As we move from one step to the next, a growing satisfaction passes through me. The pleasure of elite and secret skills, a life in which every breath is governed by specific rules, by patterns, codes, controls. I try to keep the results of the operation out of my mind, the whole point of it, the outcome of these sequences of precise and esoteric steps. But often I fail. I let the image in. I think the thought. I even say the word at times. This is confusing, of course. I feel tricked. My pleasure feels betrayed, as if it had a life of its own, a childlike or intelligent animal existence independent of the man at the firing panel. We count down from 5. Fulmer releases the lever that unwinds the system's purging disk. My pulse marker shows green at 3-second intervals. We count down from 3. We turn the modal keys 3/4 right. I activate the beam sequencer. We turn the keys 1/4 right. We count down from 3. Bluegrass music plays over the squawk box. The enhanced voice says, "You are moded to fire now." We study our world map kits. "Don't you sometimes feel a power in you?" Fulmer says. "An extreme state of good health, sort of. An arrogant healthiness. That's it. You are feeling so good you begin thinking you're a little superior to other people. A kind of life strength. An optimism about yourself that you generate almost at the expense of others. Don't you sometimes feel this?" Yes, as a matter of fact. There's probably a German word for it, but the point I want to make is that this powerful feeling is so, delicate. That's it. One day you feel it. The next day you are suddenly puny and doomed. A single little thing goes wrong. You feel doomed. You feel utterly weak and defeated and unable to act powerfully or even sensibly. Everyone else is lucky. You are unlucky, hapless, sad, ineffectual, and doomed. Yes, yes. By chance, we are over the Missouri River now, looking towards the Red Lakes of Minnesota. I watch Fulmer go through his map kit, trying to match the two worlds. This is a deep and mysterious happiness, to confirm the accuracy of a map. He seems immensely satisfied. He keeps saying, "That's it, that's it." Fulmer talks about childhood. In orbit, he has begun to think about his early years for the first time. He is surprised at the power of these memories. As he speaks, he keeps his head turned to the window. Minnesota is a human moment. Upper Red Lake, Lower Red Lake. He clearly feels he can see himself there. Kids don't take walks, he says. They don't sunbathe or sit on the porch. He seems to be saying that children's lives are too well supplied to accommodate the spells of reinforced being that the rest of us depend on. A deft enough thought, but not to be pursued. It is time to prepare for a quantum burn. We listen to the old radio shows, light flares and spreads across the blue banded edge, sunrise, sunset, the urban grids in shadow. A man and a woman trade well-timed remarks, light, pointed, bantering. There is a sweetness in the tenor voice of the young man singing, a simple vigor that time and distance and random noise have enveloped in eloquence and yearning. Every sound, every lilt of strings has this veneer of age. Fulmer says he remembers these programs, although of course he has never heard them before. What odd happenstance, what flourish or grace of the laws of physics enables us to pick up these signals? Traveled voices, chambered and dense. At times they have the detached and surreal quality of oral hallucination, voices in attic rooms, the complaints of dead relatives. But the sound effects are full of urgency and verve. Cars turn dangerous corners, crisp gunfire fills the night. It is, wartime. Wartime for dews and grape nuts flakes. Comedians make fun of the way the enemy talks. We hear hysterical mock German, moonshine Japanese. The cities are in light, the listening millions, fed, met comfortably in drowsy rooms, at war, as the night comes softly down. Fulmer says he recalls specific moments, the comic inflections, the announcer's fat man laughter. He recalls individual voices rising from the laughter of the studio audience, the crackle of a St. Louis businessman, the brassy wail of a high-shouldered blonde just arrived in California, where women wear their hair this year in aromatic bales. Fulmer drifts across the wardroom upside down, eating an almond crunch. He sometimes floats free of his hammock, sleeping in a fetal crouch, bumping into walls, adhering to a corner of the ceiling grid. "Give me a minute to think of the name," he says in his sleep. He says he dreams of vertical spaces from which he looks, as a boy, at something. My dreams are the heavy kind, the kind that are hard to wake from, to rise out of. They are strong enough to pull me back down, dense enough to leave me with a heavy head, a drugged and bloated feeling. There are episodes of faithless gratification, vaguely disturbing. It's almost unbelievable when you think of it, how they live there in all that ice and sand and mountainous wilderness. "Look at it," he says. "Huge barren deserts, huge oceans. How do they endure all those terrible things? The floods alone, the earthquakes alone make it crazy to live there. Look at those fault systems. They're so big. There's so many of them. The volcanic eruptions alone. What could be more frightening than a volcanic eruption? How do they endure avalanches, year after year, with numbing regularity? It's hard to believe people live there. The floods alone. You can see whole, huge, discolored areas, all flooded out, washed out. How do they survive? Where do they go? Look at the cloud buildups. Look at that swirling storm center. What about the people who live in the path of a storm like that? It must be packing incredible winds. The lightning alone. People exposed on beaches, near trees and telephone poles. Look at the cities with their spangled lights spreading in all directions. Try to imagine the crime and violence. Look at the smoke pall hanging low. What does that mean in terms of respiratory disorders? It's crazy. Who would live there? The deserts, how they encroach. Every year they claim more and more arable land. How enormous those snowfields are. Look at the massive storm fronts over the ocean. There are ships down there, small craft, some of them. Try to imagine the waves, the rocking, the hurricanes alone, the tidal waves. Look at those coastal communities exposed to tidal waves. What could be more frightening than a tidal wave? But they live there. They stay there. Where could they go? I want to talk to him about calorie intake, the effectiveness of the earplugs and nasal decongestants. The earplugs are human moments. The apple cider and the broccoli are human moments. Fulmer himself is a human moment, never more so than when he forgets there is a war. The close-cropped hair and longish head, the mild blue eyes that bulge slightly, the protuberant eyes of long-bodied people with stooped shoulders, the long hands and wrists, the mild face, the easy face of a handyman in a panel truck that has an extension ladder fixed to the roof and a scuffed license plate, green and white, with the state motto beneath the digits. That kind of face. He offers to give me a haircut. One interesting thing a haircut is, when you think of it. Before the war, there were time slots reserved for such activities. Houston not only had everything scheduled well in advance, but constantly monitored us for whatever meager feedback might result. We were wired, taped, scanned, diagnosed, and metered. We were men in space, objects worthy of the most scrupulous care, the deepest sentiments and anxieties. Now there is a war. Nobody cares about my hair, what I eat, how I feel about the spacecraft's decor. And it is not Houston but Colorado we are in touch with. We are no longer delicate biological specimens adrift in an alien environment. The enemy can kill us with its photons, its mesons, its charged particles faster than any calcium deficiency or trouble of the inner ear, faster than any dusting of micrometeoroids. The emotions have changed. We've stopped being candidates for an embarrassing demise, the kind of mistake or unforeseen event that tends to make a nation grope for the appropriate response. As men in war, we can be certain, dying, that we will arouse uncomplicated sorrows, the open and dependable feelings that grateful nations count on to embellish the simplest ceremony. A note about the universe. Fulmer is on the verge of deciding that our planet is alone in harboring intelligent life. We are an accident, and we happened only once. What a remark to make, in egg-shaped orbit, to someone who doesn't want to discuss the larger questions. He feels this way because of the war. The war, he says, will bring about an end to the idea that the universe swarms, as they say, with life. Other astronauts have looked past the star points and imagined infinite possibility, grape-clustered worlds teeming with higher forms. But this was before the war. Our view is changing even now, his and mine, he says, as we drift across the firmament. Is Fulmer saying that cosmic optimism is a luxury reserved for periods between world wars? Do we project our current failure and despair out towards the star clouds, the endless night? After all, he says, where are they? If they exist, why has there been no sign? Not one, not any, not a single indication that serious people might cling to, not a whisper, a radio pulse, a shadow. The war tells us it is foolish to believe. Our dialogues with Colorado Command are beginning to sound like computer-generated tea-time chat. Fulmer tolerates Colorado's jargon only to a point. He is critical of their more debased locutions and doesn't mind letting them know. Why, then, if I agree with his views on this matter, am I becoming irritated by his complaints? Is he too young to champion the language? Does he have the experience, the professional standing to scold our flight dynamics officer, our conceptual paradigm officer, our status consultants on waste management systems and evasion-related zonal options? Or is it something else completely, something unrelated to Colorado Command and our communications with them? Is it the sound of his voice? Is it just his voice that is driving me crazy? Fulmer has entered a strange phase. He spends all his time at the window now, looking down at the earth. He says little or nothing. He simply wants to look, do nothing but look. The oceans, the continents, the archipelagos. We are configured in what is called a cross-orbit series, and there is no repetition from one swing around the earth to the next. He sits there looking. He takes meals at the window, does checklists at the window, barely glancing at the instruction sheets as we pass over tropical storms, over grass fires and major ranges. I keep waiting for him to return to his pre-war habit of using quaint phrases to describe the earth. It's a beach ball, a sun-ripened fruit. But he simply looks out of the window, eating almond crunches, the wrappers floating away. The view clearly fills his consciousness. It is powerful enough to silence him, to still the voice that rolls off the roof of his mouth, to leave him turned in the seat, twisted uncomfortably for hours at a time. The view is endlessly fulfilling. It is like the answer to a lifetime of questions and vague cravings. It satisfies every childlike curiosity, every muted desire, whatever there is in him of the scientist, the poet, the primitive seer, the watcher of fire and shooting stars, whatever obsessions eat at the night side of his mind, whatever sweet and dreamy yearning he has ever felt for nameless places far away, whatever earth sense he possesses, the neural pulse of some wilder awareness, a sympathy for beasts, whatever belief in an imminent vital force, the Lord of creation, whatever secret harboring of the idea of human oneness, whatever wishfulness and simple-hearted hope, whatever of too much and not enough, all at once and little by little, whatever burning urge to escape responsibility and routine, escape his own over-specialization, the circumscribed and inward spiraling self, whatever remnants of his boyish longing to fly, his dreams of strange spaces and eerie heights, his